Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on CCS technical and advisory groups. My name is Deborah Wishmeyer, and I'm the Director of Member Services here at CCS. I'm joined today by Mieko Fujira Landers and Rachel Fisher, CCS's Member Services Librarians. Here's our agenda for today's session. We're going to provide a brief overview of our technical and advisory groups. We'll talk about how those groups participate in the CCS decision-making process, and then we'll go over how you can get involved in these groups. CCS has two kinds of groups comprised of staff at our member libraries. The first kind of group we're going to talk about today are what we call our technical groups. CCS has 6 different technical groups. Each group represents a specific service area within our member libraries. Our groups are acquisitions, CAM or cataloging and metadata management, circulation, interlibrary loan, IT, and PASS or public access services. Technical groups meet at least twice per year. Most groups meet quarterly, but we do have a few groups that meet 2 or 3 times. These meetings are held virtually or, depending on the group, have a mix of in-person or virtual meetings. It's really important that each library sends a representative to each technical group. This ensures that each member library stays up to date on CCS news and updates and allows each library to participate in discussions and the overall CCS decision-making process. Technical groups are led by CCS and technical group officers. Each group elects a chair-elect or vice chair, and a secretary from the participants. This is a really great way for group members to get experience leading and facilitating meetings, and Mieko is going to talk more about how you can volunteer as a group officer later in the session. At technical group meetings, members share best practices, engage in continuing education, discuss relevant topics and agenda items submitted by group members. We recommend policy changes, we approve procedures or workflows, and we use these meetings as an opportunity to prepare for new or upcoming projects. So we recently sent out a survey to our library contacts for different service areas to ask what members liked best about participating in technical groups. So we got a lot of really wonderful responses. So I wanted to highlight some of the most common themes that came out in the responses that we got. So respondents really like learning from and sharing knowledge with their peers. Another highlight of technical groups was the ability to crowdsource solutions to problems because most problems are impacting multiple libraries. So it's a great chance, again, to connect with your peers and come up with solutions together. Technical group meetings are also a really great way to stay in the loop with CCS news and updates. Meetings often include Polaris workflow refreshers, tips and tricks for using the software, and demos of new or existing features. So another, again, great benefit is that continuing education component of our meetings. One other highlight for members of going to technical groups was the chance to help make CCS-wide decisions. So when you're at those meetings, again, you have the opportunity to vote on procedural or even policy changes. And last but definitely not least, networking and the ability to connect with peers was another feature of technical groups that members really liked about them. So I want to highlight a couple of responses, free text responses that we got through that survey. This one says, "It's nice to touch base with other libraries and to see what they're doing or having difficulties with. Oftentimes, it's something we ourselves are struggling with or that we've had to find solutions to as well. I feel like this kind of collaboration and exchange of ideas makes our system better as a whole." And here's one other response I want to highlight. Again, that is sharing the thing that this person likes best about our meetings. "I like getting to see staff from other libraries and getting to share ideas and troubleshooting with them. I do also love the Polaris tutorials, diving a little bit deeper into some aspects of the ILS and how we can help it to work better for us. So, thank you again to everyone who participated in that survey. We want to take time in this session to talk about each of our groups, the service areas that they cover, and some of the topics that they've talked about recently. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to get us started talking about the acquisitions technical group.
The Acquisitions Technical Group discusses best practices and policies for using the ILS acquisitions functions and working with vendors. An example of this is to decide on the best practices for dealing with canceled publications. On occasion, they may need to vote on acquisitions policies. Recently, this occurred when they decided on a policy for making it easier to receive purchase order line items for different video game formats. Meetings are also important for providing continuing education opportunities. This can include discussions about acquisitions workflow and demonstrations of how to use Polaris acquisitions functions. Meetings are only twice a year. The Cataloging and Metadata Management, or CAM, technical group discusses cataloging best practices and policies. This includes reviewing the CCS local cataloging policies. They regularly vote on recommendations from SCRAP. SCRAP stands for Standard Cataloging Rules and Practices Advisory Group. A recent example included voting to allow new controlled vocabularies like homosaurus and Polish subject headings. Meetings are also important for providing continuing education opportunities. This includes demonstrating how to use specific features of Polaris. Meetings are 4 times a year.
So I am the CCS staff liaison to the Circulation Technical Group. The CIRC group meets 4 times a year quarterly, and we currently alternate between virtual and in-person meetings. These meetings are usually attended by the circulation department heads, or basically your equivalent department, and or the department supervisors. I would say libraries typically send between 1 and 3 staff members to attend the tech group. So, what happens at these meetings? It's no surprise that the content centers around circulation topics. So, at these meetings, attendees will discuss the best practices on circulation related topics and workflows. Staff will share what their local procedures and practices are and be able to hear what other libraries are doing. For example, at a recent meeting, people shared how long they give patrons to return a billed book, or mentioned if their library gives refunds if a book is lost and found. It's a great opportunity to get a sense of what other libraries do, especially if you are reevaluating your own practices or procedures. The group also votes on recommendations that come from the Circulation ILL Advisory Group. So, as Deborah will talk about later on in the webinar, we have a decision making process for adopting or changing shared workflows. One of the circulation shared workflows is how to handle damaged items. A recent ILS software upgrade included new functionality related to damaged items. So, the Circulation Technical Group reviewed and voted to approve changing our shared damaged item workflow to include that new software functionality. The technical group also serves as a forum for the exchange of circ related ideas and information. Staff will share things they're working on or an issue they're currently encountering. And it's a great way to solicit ideas or find new ways or perspectives to approach your problem. For example, here in the last few years, libraries have considered adding some new services that are not traditionally associated with the library, things like offering license plate renewals. So we had a library that was considering the service, and they were able to get tips and recommendations and hear experiences from libraries who have already started offering this service. And then finally, we always work in some small continuing education into a meeting. This is usually in the form of like a demonstration or a short presentation from CCS staff. So, for example, earlier this year, I did a demo at the Circ Tech meeting on user level settings in the Leap Find tool that you are able to customize to make using the Find tool better fit your needs. I am also the liaison to the Interlibrary Loan or ILL technical group. So this group meets 3 times a year. We historically have met like virtually twice a year and in person once a year. I think that is like subject to change year to year, though. This group's main focus is out of system resource sharing, and it's attended by the library's interlibrary loan coordinator or point person. At our ILL meetings, we discuss topics related to, as I mentioned, resource sharing with an emphasis on out of system interlibrary loan. So, again, we'll share our local practices and procedures and get input on questions or issues. So, for example, recently, ILL staff were sharing how they track or what tracking services they use when they ship items for those out of system requests. This group will also vote on recommendations from the Circ ILL advisory group. These action items may cover things like ILS setting changes or shared procedures. Recently, the group voted on some recommended changes to the CCS lost and paid interlibrary loan procedures. So these are like best practice procedures for managing out of system ILL items that patrons never returned. We'll also feature small continuing education topics. Since this group focuses on out of system resource sharing, the ILL CE tends to be driven by ILL staff rather than CCS. So, a couple of library ILL staff gave an excellent demo recently about how to create multiple hold requests in OCLC WorldShare. So, this group is really able to tap into that shared expertise of your ILL peers.
Next is the IT technical group. The IT technical group's role is to discuss technology as it relates to our iOS. As you can imagine, that covers a lot of different things, including third party hardware and software integrations with Polaris. For example, the IT group recently talked about the different self check solutions in place at our libraries, as well as patron authentication services being used like Easy Proxy and Open Athens. Discussions at the IT group can also include the topics of data solutions and reporting needs. At their most recent meeting, the IT group talked about data warehouse tools that can be used to store data and then also used for reporting. As you can imagine, our IT staff are very concerned with privacy and security and staff user management, whether that's in your library tools or in on the Polaris side. Recently, the IT group discussed incident tracking software and the different tools their library uses to reduce phishing attempts in staff emails. So sometimes the IT group can veer off of the Polaris ILS related IT topics and cover other IT concerns impacting libraries. So it's such a great group to connect with your IT peers and crowdsource ideas and information on issues that are impacting everyone. The IT group also discusses different technology trends impacting library service. So, whether this is a new tool or a best security practice. Again, this is a really great group to bring those kinds of questions and concerns to. Typically, the IT group meets virtually 4 times a year. I will add that not all of our libraries have designated IT staff. So we do have third-party IT providers like OSG staff attend IT meetings to stay in the loop on CCS happenings. The current CCS staff liaisons to the IT group are Rebecca and Bob. Next, we have PASS or Public Access Services. PASS is a really unique group. It encompasses public facing staff in youth, teen, and adult services. At our past meetings, we discuss best practices and solutions impacting those groups of staff. One of the main topics that falls under the PASS umbrella is how to use the library catalog and other patron-facing tools to promote library services. For example, one of the topics we recently talked about at PASS was how to best promote different collections via the catalog, such as adding in dashboards or carousels, and then how to track data on those different interactions. For example, using bit.ly links or other link tracking tools to gather data on clicks on dashboard links. Now, a lot of the staff that attend PASS are selectors who manage various collections. So, this group often talks about best workflow practices for collection management. That can include reports or tools that staff use to monitor high demand titles or track trends in circulation and kind of what challenges are that selectors are facing. This group also shares ideas and tips to enhance discoverability of library materials for both staff and patrons. So, again, this group is really focused on access and discovery or search and discovery. Recently, at our March Pass meeting, we talked about how to search for dyslexia friendly materials, both as a patron and as a staff member. So, we often talk about search strategies for LEAP and PowerPack at PASS, how to make use of subject headings, authority records, filters, and so on. PASS meetings typically feature continuing education, usually in the form of demos on Polaris features and workflows that impact the group. For example, we recently did a demo on the new weeding workflow that was included in Polaris 7.5. I'm currently the liaison to PASS, and the group's preference has been to meet virtually. So we typically meet for PASS 4 times a year. So those were our technical groups. Now let's go ahead and talk about the other type of group that we have, which are our advisory groups. CCS advisory groups are small committees or working groups of library staff who act as consultants for CCS. Advisory groups are asked to represent CCS libraries as a whole, recommend policy updates, ILS changes, and best practices, either to CCS or to their corresponding technical group, and then assist CCS with research and testing as needed to support projects, initiatives, etc. Staff can be nominated to an advisor group by their director or self-nominate themselves with their director's approval. We typically sent out the call for nominees for advisory groups in May, and then those selected to the groups begin their service term in July. Typically, advisory groups meet quarterly, or depending on the group, they just may meet on like an ad hoc or as needed basis. Advisory groups are expected to use their expertise and their knowledge, again, to represent the CCS community as a whole. So they're pulling in their unique perspective from their library, then also thinking big picture from sort of that CCS-wide perspective. Advisory group members participate in up to 4 advisory group meetings per year. We also do ask advisory group members to participate in 4 associated technical group meetings per year if needed. So for example, the CERC ILL advisory group, oftentimes we do ask them to attend either the CERC or ILL technical group meetings. Advisory group members are often asked to engage in online asynchronous conversation and research between meetings to help prepare for those discussions that happen in the meetings themselves. So sometimes there is homework that happens in between those meetings. And then advisory group members work with CCS staff to present findings and recommendations as needed, either maybe to their corresponding technical group and or to governance. Now, CCS for this upcoming fiscal year will have 3 advisory groups: circulation and interlibrary loan, database management, and SCREP. For this upcoming fiscal year, we are combining the UX advisor group with database management. A lot of times those 2 groups, kind of the topics they cover, overlap with each other. So we decided to consolidate them for, again, this upcoming fiscal year.
So I am the liaison to the Circulation ILL Advisory Group. As the name suggests, this group is made up of circulation and interlibrary loan staff. I want to emphasize you do not have to be a department head to serve as an advisory group member. We plan to meet quarterly, but will cancel a meeting if there are no pending agenda topics. All of our meetings are held virtually on Zoom, and the members are also expected to attend their respective technical group meetings. So if your primary role is interlibrary loan, you'd attend the ILL technical group meetings. If your primary role is circulation, you'll attend the Circ Tech meetings. So what kind of stuff does the Circ ILL advisory group do? They primarily serve as consultants to CCS. They will consult with us on ILS related topics, primarily configuration changes. So if there's a new set of Circ or ILL related functionality in a Polaris release, we will consult with the advisory group to see if those new features would be of use to member libraries. So an example here, in a recent release, there was a new approval workflow for waiving fees from patron accounts. The advisory group helped us test, considered the pros and cons of the workflow, and together we determined that it would hinder staff and negatively impact the patron experience, so we decided not to enable this new feature. They also help us refine documentation. And the big piece of documentation for this group is the circulation manual. We are pretty regularly reviewing segments of the CCS Circ manual, making sure that language is clear and that it reflects current procedures. And finally, they help us research and recommend policy and best practice changes. A somewhat recent example was that the group helped develop the circulation report guidelines. So here we evaluated existing circulation related reports. We identified the ones that had the biggest impact on Circ departments and patrons and developed guidelines around how frequently libraries should look at or use those reports. So the Circ ILL advisory group, it's made up of 7 members, but anyone is welcome to attend the meetings. Non-advisory group members are welcome and encouraged to participate in discussions, but just be aware that only the advisory group members may vote on action items.
Next up, we have database management. Database management is our cross-departmental advisory group with 9 voting members. We're making a slight change to the composition of database management for the next fiscal year. Database management will have 2 circulation and ILL staff, 2 technical services staff, 2 public services staff, 2 directors, and then 1 staff member that kind of focuses on patron communications and or digital services. So again, we're really looking for a balance of service areas because the topics brought to this group oftentimes kind of cross departments and are impacting multiple service areas. Database management discusses and votes on requests for new Polaris policies. So when we get a request for a new Polaris material type or item statistical class, those go to database management for discussion and a vote on whether to approve it or not. Database management also researches, analyzes, and issues recommendations on other system-wide policy or practice changes that would impact multiple areas of service. So for example, back in 2021 and 2022, database management spent, I think it was like 6 months researching like holds data and resource sharing numbers, and ultimately helped craft and recommend a resource sharing policy, which was adopted by governing board in 2022. I am currently the staff liaison to database management. Database management is one of the groups that meets really on an as-needed basis. So when we have agendas to bring to the group, we will schedule a meeting.
If you are really interested in cataloging policy, you may like being a SCRAP member. This stands for Standard Cataloging Rules and Practice Advisory Group. This advisory group researches and recommends This advisory group researches and recommends cataloging best practices for standards or policies to the Cataloging and Metadata Management or CAM technical group. Examples include voting to recommend new local practices or new controlled vocabularies. This advisory group also oversees the Catalogers Wiki and reviews and updates it as needed. There are 7 voting members, but anyone can attend meetings. Meetings are held virtually 4 times a year.
So I wanted to just again call attention to some of the things that participants like best about being involved in our advisory groups. Again, we sent a survey out to staff who had previously been involved in advisory groups, and this is what they had to say. They really liked accomplishing a lot of work through its groups, participating, you feel really productive. Another thing that um, participants enjoyed was just this active and deep discussion with their peers. So in advisory groups, you kind of like get more into the nitty-gritty details of policies and decisions. And, if that's something you like, I think advisory groups are a great choice for you. Participants also really liked the chance to help shape policy and participate in the decision-making process. Again, these advisory groups are helping guide CCS and giving feedback and helping us research these kind of system-wide decisions. Advisory group members also liked working to improve the patron experience. All of our groups, again, are making decisions and recommendations with the patron in mind. So it's great to be able to help work towards helping our communities. And then last but not least, getting to know other library staff. Because advisory groups are a little bit smaller, you get the chance to kind of get to know your peers. That maybe is a little bit harder in the larger technical groups. So from that survey, I just wanted to share one comment about what someone liked about the group, and that was the sense that I had a voice and represented my library in making decisions that affect the entire group. So let's talk about how both of these groups, or where both of these groups fit within the overall CCS decision-making process. Now, here on the screen is our decision-making matrix for ILS setting or procedure changes. So this looks a little bit intimidating at first, but let's go over it together. So in this chart, we have kind of 4 different groups that help us participate in making decisions when it comes to the ILS. We have, of course, CCS staff. We have our advisory groups. We have our technical groups. And then we also have our governance groups. We have governing board and executive committee. So in this chart, we have 3 different kinds of decisions that we're often making when it comes to ILS setting or procedure changes. That first kind of decision is where there's no change to staff workflow and there's no financial or HR impact. And by HR impact, we mean like a staffing change would be required to implement whatever decision we're talking about. So when there's no change to staff workflow and there's no HR or financial impact, typically those types of decisions go to advisory groups first. CCS consults with our advisory groups, and then the advisory groups issue a recommendation to CCS. And then CCS then has the authority to approve that recommendation. At which point, we inform technical groups and governing board through the newsletter and or at their meetings, and we're good to go. Now, the next type of decision would be a decision where there is a change to workflow, but there's no financial or HR impact. So there's no cost to this change, and there is no staffing impact. Now, because this type of change or decision involves a change of workflow for staff, usually these start out in advisory groups for discussion, and then the advisory groups recommend a change up to their corresponding technical group. Now, because again, there is a change in workflow, we want to make sure we're discussing this with the group as a whole and giving kind of the wider membership the chance to participate and help come to a decision here. So the technical group in this scenario is the one that will approve the change. Once the technical group has voted, we then inform our governance committees as needed. The last type of decision that we typically would be making is one that has financial or HR impact, meaning it's a decision that costs money, or it involves an addition of service or a policy change. So these are kind of like, again, our high level decisions here. In this case, typically, we would be seeking a recommendation from an advisory group or a technical group. Those recommendations are then elevated up to governing board or executive committee. Depending on the decision, they would then have the authority to approve a change. So I hope that's helpful. Give kind of the overall like big picture or context for where these two types of groups fall in our overall decision-making process. And you can see that both have play an important role in how we decide things here at CCS, which is why it's really important to have make sure libraries are participating in both kinds of groups so that we and that you have a voice and have a say and contribute to the decisions we're making collectively as a group. So let's talk now about how you can get involved. Hopefully your curiosity is piqued and you really want to get involved in all of our groups. So the first way to get involved is to attend a future meeting. You can view all of our meetings and events on our calendar on our website, and I've got the URL here on this slide. You can also sign up for our various CCS listservs to help stay up to date on upcoming meetings and agendas. So each group has a corresponding listserv. So we've got our circulation listserv, our ILL, our PASS, IT, etc. So this is where we send out our call for agenda items, we send our meeting RSVP forms, and where we send our agendas, our minutes, etc. So if you are not already signed up for some of our listservs, we definitely encourage you to do so. You can reach out to our help desk at help@ccslib.org, and CCS staff can help you get signed up, or you can visit our listserv website to create an account and sign yourself up. Next, we recommend that you pay attention to CCS News. If you're not signed up, we'd love to get you signed up for that. We use CCS News to share info on upcoming meetings. We link to agendas, minutes, and then recordings. If you happened to miss a meeting, you can watch the recording back if it was a virtual meeting. Next, you can nominate yourself for an advisory group. So we will be sending out the advisory group nomination form before the end of the month of May. So you can self-nominate yourself for an advisory group with director approval, or your director may choose to submit up to 3 nominees on behalf of the library. So CCS staff, once we receive all of the nominations, will put together our group rosters. And when we do that, we try to have a nice balance. We try to make sure we've got good representation across all of our member libraries. We want a balance of both new and returning group members. It's always really helpful to have kind of new ideas coming in, but also some members that have some of like the historical context from the previous year, because a lot of times agenda items carry on from one year to another. And we're talking about database management. As I mentioned earlier, we're also looking for kind of diversity of service areas. So for database management, we want to make sure we're getting staff from multiple departments because those decisions are really cross-departmental ones. I'm going to turn it over to Mieko to talk a little bit about how you can volunteer as a technical group officer.
One of the ways to get involved in a technical group, other than attending the meetings, is to become a technical group officer. Each technical group holds elections in the spring to fill officer positions for the following year. I say elections, but it's typically more of like soliciting a volunteer situation than an actual election. Each tech group has three officers. You have the chair, the vice chair or chair elect, and the secretary. I'm quickly going to review the role of each officer, starting with secretary. So, the secretary is a 1 year appointment. In a nutshell, the secretary is responsible for the minutes. They take notes during the meeting. For in person meetings, the other officers and I will touch base with the secretary afterwards just to see if there's any gaps in notes that we can help fill in. But when you have virtual meetings, those meetings are recorded. So for virtual meetings, you have the recording to work off of. The secretary will then draft the minutes, have the other officers and the CCS liaison review them, and then share them out with the tech group through the appropriate listserv. The vice chair or chair elect is a 2 year appointment. During your first year, you'll serve as the vice chair. Your primary responsibility that year will be to fill in as chair if the chair is unavailable to make the meeting. And depending on the group, you may also help do things like monitor chats during their virtual meetings. And then in the second year of your appointment, you will assume the role of the tech group chair. So, as chair, these are your primary responsibilities. You will be responsible for compiling the meeting agendas. Most groups use a form, an online form where staff can submit agenda topics, and so you can use that to build the agenda. You'll also send meeting reminders to the group, right? So you'll ask group members to submit their topics to RSVP, share the meeting information through the appropriate CCS listserv. And then, of course, you'll facilitate the meeting. So you will call the meeting to order, move the group through the agenda, call for those action item motions. No meeting facilitation experience is necessary by any means. Your CCS liaison is there to help guide you through. So, as I mentioned, these are either 1 year or 2 year appointments. The appointment lines up with our fiscal year, so they run from July to June. The CCS liaison will always hold an officer orientation ahead of the first meeting of the year. During the orientation, we'll go through the timeline of events leading up to the meeting, like when you should send the initial call for agenda items, when you should send out the agenda before the meeting. And then we also review what to do during a meeting. We also have templates. So we have templates available for both the agenda and for the minutes, so the officers don't have to create that content from scratch. And I just want to emphasize that officers will have the resources and support from CCS. We never want the officers to feel like they're going at this alone. It's a pretty small time commitment. So, this is a great way to get some committee or group experience without needing to dedicate a lot of time. If you're looking for something to add to your resume, please consider volunteering as an officer during a future fiscal year.